Ethan Calloway was feeding his 3 German shepherds on his back porch in Cedar Hollow when he heard a child's scream pierce the air from the swollen creek behind his property. Before he could react, his truck door flew open and 4 shapes bolted toward the sound: Duke, Max, Bella, and astonishingly, Luna, the gray tabby cat, running in perfect formation with the dogs. 6 months earlier, Ethan had lost his beloved wife Rebecca to cancer after 43 years of marriage. When the townspeople pulled the child from the rushing creek that day, what they witnessed the little tabby cat do made their blood run cold with both fear and wonder. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Cedar Hollow, Kentucky had once been a town full of promise. Nestled in the rolling hills where the morning mist clung to the valleys like a mother reluctant to let go of her child. It had thrived for generations on the coal that ran in thick black veins beneath its surface. But the mines had closed 10 years ago, leaving behind men with coal dust in their lungs and not much else to show for a lifetime of hard work. Ethan Calloway was one of those men. At 65, Ethan's hands still bore the calluses of his mining days, though they'd softened somewhat in the decade since the Hollow Creek mine had shuttered its operations. His face, deeply lined around the eyes and mouth, told the story of a man who had spent his life squinting into the dark and occasionally breaking into a wide, unexpected smile. Those smiles had become rare treasures in the 6 months since Rebecca had passed. Rebecca Calloway had been the heartbeat of their modest white clapboard house for 43 years. A music teacher at Cedar Hollow Elementary, she had filled their home with piano melodies and warmth that seemed to radiate from her very being. Even in her final days, when the cancer had hollowed her cheeks and dimmed the light in her hazel eyes, she'd insisted on being carried to the living room to sit at her upright piano, her fingers too weak to play, but her spirit still seeking the comfort of the polished keys. "Every family needs balance, Ethan," she'd told him one evening as they sat on the porch swing, watching their 3 German shepherds chase fireflies in the yard. "Dogs give unconditional love, but cats teach you to earn it." She'd wanted a cat for years, but somehow the timing had never been right. After Duke, their oldest shepherd came along, then Max, and finally Bella, each dog seeming to fill a space in their home that they hadn't realized was empty until it was filled. The cat had remained Rebecca's unfulfilled wish. Duke, now 14, moved with the dignified slowness of a canine elder statesman. His muzzle had gone almost completely white, and his once mighty stride had shortened to a careful walk. But his brown eyes remained alert and watchful, especially since Rebecca had gone. Max, 10 years old and still brimming with more energy than sense, had been Rebecca's project, rescued from a neglectful situation when he was just a gangly pup. Bella, the youngest at 8, was perhaps the smartest of the 3, with an uncanny ability to anticipate her humans' needs before they'd even recognize them themselves. Across town, in a Victorian home that had seen better days but was maintained with militant precision, lived Eleanor Blackburn. At 66, Eleanor had been the pillar of Cedar Hollow First Baptist Church for nearly 4 decades. Her silver hair was always pulled into a tight bun, her clothes pressed and proper, her opinions as starched and unbending as her collar. As head of the church committee and 3 other town organizations, Eleanor believed firmly in the natural order of things. There was a right way and a wrong way, and little room for interpretation in between. "That man's turning into a hermit with those dogs," she often remarked to anyone who would listen, her thin lips pressing into a disapproving line. "It isn't healthy. The way he treats them like people. Rebecca would have wanted him to move on, join the community again." What Eleanor didn't say, but everyone knew, was that she'd had her eye on bringing Ethan into the fold of her church fundraising committee since the appropriate mourning period had passed. A widower with carpentry skills would be an asset. If only he could be separated from those animals long enough to be useful. The only person who seemed capable of softening Eleanor's rigid edges was her granddaughter, Lily. At 10 years old, Lily Blackburn possessed a curiosity that frequently tested her grandmother's patience and a compassion that occasionally made Eleanor question her own certitudes, though never out loud. Lily's parents had divorced when she was 6, and her mother, Eleanor's daughter, had moved to Louisville for work, leaving Lily to spend most weekends and summers in Cedar Hollow with a grandmother who loved her fiercely if somewhat stiffly. Dr. William Hayes had been Cedar Hollow's only veterinarian for 25 years, operating out of a converted house on Main Street. At 50, with prematurely gray hair and eyeglasses that never seemed to sit quite straight on his nose, he had a reputation for kindness that extended to both animals and their humans. He had treated the Callaways' dogs since they were puppies and had been among the first to bring a casserole when news of Rebecca's diagnosis had spread through town like wildfire in dry brush. Cedar Hollow itself had seen better days. The mine closure had pulled the economic rug out from under the town, leaving storefronts empty and homes foreclosed. Those who could afford to leave had mostly gone, seeking opportunity in bigger cities. Those who remained held on with the stubborn determination that had defined Kentucky Hill people for generations. They made do. They helped neighbors. They remembered better times and hoped, without much evidence, that such times might come again. In this setting of faded hopes and quiet resilience, Ethan had retreated into his grief and the company of his dogs after Rebecca died. The townsfolk brought food and offered condolences in those first few weeks, but as often happens, the acute attention faded, leaving Ethan alone with his memories and his canine companions, who seemed to understand the shape and weight of his loss in ways humans could not. "Dogs know," Rebecca had always said. "They feel what we feel before we even know we're feeling it." Perhaps that's why on the mornings when the absence of her hit him hardest, Ethan would wake to find all 3 German shepherds had abandoned their usual sleeping spots to crowd onto his bed, their warm bodies and steady breathing a silent comfort in the cold dawn light. Few people came to visit anymore, which suited Ethan fine. He spent his days in the small woodworking shop he'd built in the backyard, crafting rocking chairs and hope chests that he sold at Mitchell's general store in town. The dogs kept him company, Duke often sleeping in a patch of sunlight by the door, Max carrying scraps of wood around like trophies, and Bella attentively watching his every move as if studying the craft for herself. When Rebecca was alive, their home had been a gathering place for her students' recitals, for neighborhood potlucks, for Christmas caroling that filled the rooms with music and laughter. Now, silence hung in the spaces between the ticking of the grandfather clock and the occasional sighs of the dogs. Ethan had promised Rebecca he would try to keep living after she was gone, but most days he was merely existing. The distinction would have mattered to her, but he couldn't seem to find his way across the chasm between the two. Little did he know that a tiny gray tabby kitten, fighting for her life in a storm drain as the spring rains swelled the creek behind his property, would soon become the unexpected bridge between his grief and his promised attempt at living again. The spring storm arrived with a vengeance that even the oldest residents of Cedar Hollow couldn't recall seeing before. Rain lashed against windows like tiny fists demanding entrance, and the wind howled through the valley with such force that it seemed determined to reshape the very landscape. Standing at his kitchen window, Ethan watched the creek behind his property transform from a gentle stream into a roiling, angry torrent of muddy water. "Looks like we're in for a rough one, fellas," he said to the 3 German shepherds who had gathered anxiously at his feet. Duke, the oldest, pressed against Ethan's leg with a steadying presence that belied his advanced years. Max paced nervously between the window and the door, while Bella sat alertly, her intelligent eyes fixed on Ethan as if waiting for instructions. The electricity had gone out an hour earlier, leaving the house in a gray half-light that made the afternoon feel like dusk. Ethan lit the kerosene lamps that Rebecca had always kept ready, just in case, she'd say. Practical to the core despite her artistic soul. The familiar scent of the burning oil brought her presence into the room so vividly that Ethan had to catch his breath. It was during a brief lull in the downpour that he heard a sound so faint and desperate that at first he thought he'd imagined it. Duke's ears perked up instantly, his body suddenly alert. The old dog moved to the back door with surprising speed, whining softly. "What is it, boy?" Ethan asked, reaching for his rain slicker. The sound came again, barely audible above the renewed fury of the rain, a high, thin cry that could have been a bird or a small animal in distress. Duke pawed at the door insistently, against his better judgment. Ethan opened the door, and all three dogs bolted into the rain before he could stop them. "Duke, Max, Bella," he called, but they were already racing toward the swollen creek, moving with clear purpose, cursing under his breath. Ethan pulled on his boots and followed them into the deluge. By the time he caught up, the dogs had gathered at a storm drain where the water rushed violently into the creek. They were circling and whining, clearly agitated about something trapped inside. Duke kept looking back at Ethan, then at the drain, his usual dignified demeanor replaced by urgent concern. Ethan knelt in the mud, his knees protesting the motion, and peered into the drain. There, clinging to a metal grate with tiny claws, was a bedraggled gray tabby kitten, its fur plastered to its small body. Each time the water surged, the kitten's grip weakened, yet somehow it held on with a determination that struck Ethan as both pitiful and admirable. "Hold on there, little one," he murmured, reaching carefully into the rushing water. The kitten was so exhausted it didn't even struggle when his fingers closed gently around its tiny body. As he lifted it free, he was certain it was already gone. It felt cold and lifeless in his palm. But then he felt it the faintest tremor, a whisper of a heartbeat beneath his fingers. To Ethan's astonishment, Duke moved forward and gently licked the kitten's wet fur, an instinctive gesture of care that left him speechless. Max and Bella crowded close, forming a protective semicircle, their usual boisterous energy contained and focused on the tiny creature in Ethan's hands. "Easy now," Ethan warned, expecting some sign of the natural canine aggression toward cats. But something remarkable happened instead. All three dogs seemed to recognize the kitten's vulnerable state and responded with a nurturing instinct that transcended their usual nature. Tucking the kitten inside his jacket against his body heat, Ethan hurried back to the house with the dogs following closely, their attention never wavering from the small bundle against his chest. Once inside, he filled a hot water bottle, wrapped it in a towel, and created a makeshift bed in a shoebox in the kitchen. As he used an eyedropper to feed the kitten some warmed milk, he spoke sternly to the dogs who watched with intense interest. "Don't get attached. Tomorrow we'll take it to Dr. Hayes and find it a good home." But even as he said the words, something in the way Duke settled his large body protectively near the shoebox made Ethan wonder if it would be that simple. That night, Ethan awoke to find his bed empty of dogs, an unusual occurrence, as at least one of them typically slept near him since Rebecca died. Following the sound of soft whining, he discovered all three German shepherds curled protectively around the shoebox, Duke's large body closest to the kitten, providing warmth and security. "Well, I'll be damned," Ethan murmured, witnessing something he couldn't quite explain, but that reminded him powerfully of Rebecca's insistence that animals understood more than humans gave them credit for. Standing there in the kitchen, watching his dogs guard an orphaned kitten with such gentle care, Ethan felt something shift inside him, a small crack in the wall of grief he'd built around his heart, allowing in the faintest glimmer of light. 6 months passed, transforming the half-drowned kitten into a sleek, confident tabby cat. The tiny creature that had once fit in the palm of Ethan's hand now moved through the house with purpose, her gray striped coat gleaming with health and her green eyes bright with intelligence. Ethan had named her Luna after the crescent-shaped white marking on her forehead that reminded him of a sliver of moon against a night sky. Just temporary. He told Dr. Hayes during that first examination the morning after the storm, "Until she's stronger, then she goes to a proper home." Dr. Hayes had raised an eyebrow, glancing at the three well-behaved German shepherds sitting patiently in his waiting room, their eyes fixed intently on the examination room door as if they could see through it to the tiny creature beyond. "They seem pretty invested in this kitten's welfare from what I can see." What had begun as a temporary arrangement had evolved into something Ethan could never have anticipated. Luna hadn't just survived, she had adapted to her unusual environment in ways that both fascinated and bewildered him. Rather than developing typical feline behaviors, she had begun to mimic the dogs with an uncanny precision that made Ethan question everything he thought he knew about animal behavior. It started with small things. When Ethan called the dogs in from the yard, Luna would come racing alongside them, responding to her name with the same eager attentiveness. Instead of the independent aloofness typical of cats, she followed the dogs from room to room, seemingly distressed when separated from her canine family. At feeding time, she lined up with Duke, Max, and Bella, waiting patiently for her bowl to be placed alongside theirs, only eating when Ethan gave the command that released the dogs to their food. "It's not natural." Eleanor Blackburn sniffed when she stopped by one evening with a casserole, one of the endless parade of pitying food deliveries since Rebecca's death. "Cats and dogs are natural enemies. You're confusing that poor kitten." Luna chose that moment to toddle into the living room, followed closely by her three canine shadows. When she stumbled, Duke was there immediately, nudging her gently back onto her feet. "Doesn't look confused to me," Ethan remarked dryly, watching the interspecies family with growing wonder. As Luna grew stronger, Ethan's resolve to find her another home weakened. There was something about watching the unlikely bond develop between predator and prey, something that spoke to Ethan's wounded heart about unexpected connections and second chances. "What do you think?" "Sarah," he asked the empty room one night, Luna purring on his lap while the three dogs lay at his feet. "Is this what you had in mind all along?" The answering silence didn't feel quite as empty as before. One morning, as Ethan was sorting through a box of Rebecca's belongings, something he'd put off for months. Unable to face the finality of it, he discovered a leather-bound journal he hadn't seen before. Opening it, he recognized Rebecca's flowing handwriting immediately, and his heart clenched with both pain and unexpected joy at this new connection to her. The journal entries dated back to before they were married, revealing a side of Rebecca he'd never fully known. Before becoming a music teacher in Cedar Hollow, she had studied animal behavior in college, even publishing several papers on interspecies communication and bonding. She had abandoned that path when they married and moved to Cedar Hollow for Ethan's mining job, but her fascination with animal behavior had never completely disappeared. "The boundaries we create between species are largely human constructs," she had written. "Animals themselves are much more adaptable and open to connection across these artificial lines than we give them credit for. Under the right conditions, with early exposure and positive reinforcement, many behaviors we consider instinctive can be remarkably fluid." Ethan read the journal entries with growing amazement, seeing Luna's unusual development in a new light. Rebecca's unfulfilled wish to add a cat to their family hadn't been just a casual desire. It had been connected to her early passion for understanding how animals relate to one another and adapt to different social environments. "She knew," Ethan whispered to Duke, who had settled his aging body at Ethan's feet while he read. "Somehow, she knew this would happen." It wasn't mystical or supernatural. It was Rebecca's deep understanding of animal behavior and her belief in the possibility of connections that defied conventional expectations. Word of Luna's unusual behavior began to spread through Cedar Hollow. Some found it amusing, others disturbing. But no one could deny that something remarkable was happening at the Calloway place. When Ethan finally gave up the pretense that Luna was temporary and began taking her on walks with the dogs, a harness fashioned from one of Bella's old puppy collars, the sight became the talk of the town. "There goes the crazy dog-cat man," he would hear people whisper as he passed with his unusual entourage. Some laughed, some shook their heads disapprovingly, but increasingly people would cross the street specifically to get a closer look at Luna. Children especially were drawn to the novelty. To Ethan's surprise, one of Luna's most frequent visitors was Lily Blackburn, Eleanor's granddaughter. Despite her grandmother's disapproval, the 10-year-old had developed a fascination with Luna that bordered on scientific interest. She kept a small notebook where she documented Luna's behaviors, comparing them with those of normal cats she observed around the neighborhood. "Luna doesn't play with string the way other cats do," she reported one afternoon, sitting cross-legged on Ethan's living room floor. "She wants to play fetch and tug of war instead." Ethan nodded, watching as Luna enthusiastically chased the tennis ball Lily had rolled across the floor, returning it with a proud trot that mirrored Max's retrieving style perfectly. "She likes what she likes," he said simply. "Grandma says it's because she's confused," Lily continued, her pencil scratching across the page of her notebook. "But I don't think Luna's confused at all. I think she knows exactly who she is." From the mouth of babes, Ethan thought. The girl had articulated what he felt, but couldn't quite express that Luna's identity wasn't about conforming to what a cat should be, but about being authentically herself, whatever form that took. Eleanor's campaign against Luna's unusual upbringing intensified as the cat's reputation spread. What had begun as one woman's meddling evolved into a small but vocal group of townspeople who felt that Ethan's unusual pet family represented something troubling. "It's not just about one confused cat," Eleanor declared at a community meeting held at the town hall. "It's about maintaining natural order. Next thing you know, people will be claiming their goldfish thinks it's a hamster." Ethan sat at the back of the room, listening with a mixture of amusement and irritation as Eleanor outlined her concerns to the 24 attendees. Mayor Thompson looked particularly uncomfortable, clearly wishing he were anywhere but moderating this peculiar debate. "Mrs. Blackburn," the mayor said cautiously, "while we appreciate your concern for animal welfare, I'm not sure there's any town ordinance being violated here. Mr. Calloway's animals are well cared for, properly licensed, and not causing any disturbance." "Not causing a disturbance?" Eleanor's voice rose an octave. "That cat tried to join the 4th of July dog parade. It disrupted the entire event." What Eleanor and her supporters didn't understand, what Ethan himself was only beginning to grasp through Rebecca's journals, was that Luna's unusual adaptation wasn't confusion or distress. It was a testament to the remarkable flexibility of young minds and the power of early environment to shape identity and behavior. Luna wasn't a cat who thought she was a dog. She was simply Luna, defining herself on her own unique terms. As summer progressed into early autumn, Luna's remarkable integration into her canine family continued to evolve in ways that both delighted Ethan and occasionally left him speechless. The gray tabby had grown into a sleek, muscular cat with unusually strong legs from keeping up with her larger siblings. Her coat gleamed with health, and her movements flowed with a grace that somehow combined feline precision with canine purpose. What had once seemed like simple mimicry had developed into a complex set of behaviors that blurred the line between feline and canine identity. Each morning began the same way Ethan would wake to find all 4 animals curled together at the foot of his bed. Luna typically nestled between Duke's front paws or pressed against Bella's side. When Ethan rose, they would stretch in near-perfect synchronization before padding downstairs for breakfast. where Luna would sit in line with the dogs, waiting patiently for her food bowl to be placed alongside theirs. "You're the darndest thing," Ethan often told Luna as she waited with the same disciplined stillness as Duke, while Max's tail betrayed his excitement and Bella occasionally whined in anticipation. Unlike typical cats who would weave impatiently between their owner's legs or meow insistently, Luna had adopted the German Shepherd's trained restraint. Their walks had become the talk of Cedar Hollow. Ethan had fashioned a special harness for Luna after she'd consistently demonstrated her desire to join the dogs on their daily excursions. Unlike most cats who fought against leashes, Luna pranced proudly alongside her larger companions, matching their pace and stopping when they stopped. The neighborhood cats, however, did not share the town's growing fascination with Luna. Ethan's backyard had become something of a feline no-go zone, with local cats giving it a wide berth after several bewildering encounters with Luna. She would approach them with the direct, confident gait of a dog, lacking the cautious circling and elaborate body language typically employed by cats meeting for the first time. When she tried to initiate play by dropping into a playbow, a classic dog invitation, the other cats would arch their backs, hiss, and flee. "Poor Luna doesn't understand why they don't want to play," Ethan remarked to Dr. Hayes during a routine checkup visit for all 4 animals. "It's like they're speaking different languages." "In a sense, they are," Dr. Hayes replied, watching as Luna sat obediently on the examination table, allowing herself to be handled with the same cooperative nature as the German Shepherds. Luna's primary socialization was with dogs during her developmental period. She missed the window when kittens typically learn cat-specific communication. "Is she unhappy?" "Do you think," Ethan asked, voicing the concern that occasionally nagged at him, especially after witnessing Luna's repeated rejection by other cats. Dr. Hayes considered the question thoughtfully while Luna jumped down from the table and immediately positioned herself between Duke and Bella, leaning against Bella's front leg in a gesture of clear contentment. "Happiness is subjective," the veterinarian finally said, "but if we define it as being secure in one's environment, having strong social bonds, and displaying natural play and exploration behaviors, then I'd say Luna is one of the happiest cats I've ever treated." He smiled at Ethan. "She's just happy in a uniquely Luna way." Ethan's journals about Luna had become a daily ritual, a way of processing the remarkable journey he was witnessing. Some evenings, after the animals had settled in for the night, he would sit at Rebecca's old writing desk by the window and record the day's observations, Luna's attempts to join Max in chasing squirrels up trees, her careful grooming of Duke's ears when the old dog was too tired to do it himself, her persistent efforts to make the barking sounds that came so naturally to her siblings. One night, as he was writing, Ethan came across another of Rebecca's journals tucked in the desk drawer. This one was more recent than the one he'd found earlier, with entries dating right up until her diagnosis. What he read made his heart both ache and soar. "Ethan keeps asking what gift I want for our anniversary," she had written 3 years earlier. "How do I tell him that what I really want is to return to the research I abandoned all those years ago? Not to leave teaching, I love my students too much for that, but to combine my 2 passions. I've been corresponding with Dr. Linnea Jenkins at UK about the possibility of a small study on interspecies socialization. She thinks our 3 shepherds would make excellent subjects if we introduced a kitten into the household. Ethan would think I've lost my mind." The next entry, dated a few months later, revealed more. "I've decided not to push the cat issue with Ethan. His work in the mines is becoming more stressful as they talk of closing, and adding another animal to our household right now would only add to his concerns. Dr. Jenkins understands and has suggested we revisit the idea when things settle down. Still, I can't help but wonder what would happen. Would a kitten raised from birth among our dogs adopt their social patterns? Would the dogs accept it as one of their own? The possibilities fascinate me. even if they must remain theoretical for now. Ethan set down the journal, his vision blurred with tears. All those times he'd gently deflected Rebecca's hints about adding a cat to their family. He'd had no idea he was postponing something that meant so much more to her than just having another pet. She had wanted to reconnect with her first passion, to contribute something meaningful to animal behavior research, to explore questions that had fascinated her since college. And now, in the most unlikely of circumstances, her unfinished research was playing out right under his roof. Luna was living the experiment Rebecca had never had the chance to conduct. The realization hit Ethan with the force of physical pain how much Rebecca would have loved to witness what was happening with Luna, how carefully she would have documented every nuance of behavior, how her face would have lit up with each new discovery. "She should be here," he whispered to the empty room. For the first time since her death, the anger felt as strong as the grief anger at the unfairness of it all, at the timing that had robbed Rebecca of seeing her long-deferred dream come to fruition in such an unexpected way. The discovery of Rebecca's research ambitions gave Ethan a new sense of purpose. His journal entries became more detailed, more analytical, trying to capture the kinds of observations Rebecca would have made. He began reading the books on animal behavior that he found among her belongings, educating himself about concepts like critical periods of socialization and behavioral plasticity. Lily Blackburn became his unexpected research assistant. The girl's methodical approach to observing Luna reminded Ethan of Rebecca's scientific mind, and he found himself sharing carefully selected passages from Rebecca's journals with her, teaching her the proper terminology and guiding her developing observational skills. "My grandmother says animals should stay with their own kind," Lily confided one afternoon as they watched Luna and the dogs playing an elaborate game of tag in the backyard. "She says mixing them up only leads to trouble." "And what do you think?" Ethan asked. Lily considered the question with a seriousness beyond her years. "I think Luna is happier than any cat I've ever seen, and the dogs love her, so maybe their own kind isn't about what species they are, but who they love and who loves them back." Ethan smiled, unexpectedly moved by the child's wisdom. "I think you might be onto something there, Lily. Your grandmother means well, but sometimes people get so caught up in how things are supposed to be that they can't see how things actually are." Eleanor Blackburn, meanwhile, had been gathering allies for what she called her proper pet ownership campaign. What had begun as one woman's meddling had evolved into a small but vocal group of townspeople who felt that Ethan's unusual pet family represented something troubling about the moral fabric of Cedar Hollow. "It's unnatural," Eleanor insisted during one of her weekly meetings at the church. "Animals have their place in God's creation, and it isn't for us to confuse them about what they are." What Ethan didn't know, what no one in Cedar Hollow knew, was the real source of Eleanor's discomfort with cats. 30 years earlier, her son Thomas had been severely scratched across the face by a feral cat he'd tried to pet against Eleanor's warnings. The wounds had become infected, requiring hospitalization and leaving scars that, while faded now, had once been livid reminders of what Eleanor considered her failure to protect her child. Her crusade against Luna wasn't just about maintaining natural order, it was about a deep-seated fear she had never fully acknowledged, even to herself. Cats, in Eleanor's mind, were unpredictable and dangerous, particularly to children. The idea of a cat being raised to believe it was something else struck her as not just unnatural but potentially hazardous. What if Luna's true feline nature emerged suddenly and violently around impressionable children like Lily? But Eleanor's concerns took an unexpected turn when Cedar Hollow Elementary's principal approached her after church one Sunday. "Mrs. Blackburn, I wondered if you might help us with something. We're planning our annual farm day for the children, and Dr. Hayes suggested that Mr. Calloway's unusual pets might make an educational addition. Since your granddaughter spends so much time observing the animals, I thought you might approach Mr. Calloway on our behalf." Eleanor was momentarily speechless. You want to expose impressionable children to a cat that thinks it's a dog, for educational purposes? The principal, a sensible woman in her 50s who had weathered many of Eleanor's campaigns over the years, smiled patiently. We thought it might be a wonderful opportunity to teach the children about adaptation and acceptance of differences. Dr. Hayes has offered to provide the scientific context, and we believe the children would benefit from seeing firsthand how animals can form bonds across species lines. Caught between her distrust of cats and her inability to refuse a direct request from the school where her granddaughter was a student, Eleanor found herself in an uncomfortable position. "I'll speak to him," she said stiffly, "but I can't promise anything." The conversation with Ethan was predictably awkward. Standing on his front porch, rigid with discomfort, Eleanor delivered the school's request with all the enthusiasm of someone reciting a dental procedure. "You want Luna and the dogs to visit the school?" Ethan couldn't hide his surprise. "I thought you were dead set against Luna's unnatural upbringing." "It wasn't my idea," Eleanor said primly. "The principal and Dr. Hayes seemed to think it would be educational." She hesitated, then added reluctantly, "And Lily is quite excited about the possibility." Ethan studied the older woman thoughtfully. There was something in her posture, a tension that went beyond her usual rigidity, that made him wonder what was really behind her opposition to Luna. "Why does it bother you so much? Eleanor, Luna's happy. The dogs are happy. No one's being harmed." Eleanor's gaze slid away from his, fixing on a point in the distance. "It's not about happiness. It's about nature, about things being what they're meant to be." "And who decides what something is meant to be?" Ethan asked quietly. "Luna never had a chance to learn how to be a proper cat. She was orphaned too young, nearly drowned. The dogs are the only family she's ever known. Would it have been kinder to force her to live according to her feline nature when she had no concept of what that even meant?" Eleanor had no immediate answer, her usual certainty momentarily shaken. Before she could gather her thoughts, Luna appeared on the porch, followed closely by Duke. The old dog moved stiffly these days, his arthritis more pronounced as the weather turned cooler, but he still maintained his protective watch over the smaller cat. To Ethan's astonishment, Luna approached Eleanor directly, her tail held high in a friendly greeting that was neither typically feline nor canine but uniquely her own. When Eleanor instinctively stepped back, Luna sat at her feet and looked up expectantly, in the same way the dogs did when meeting someone new, attentive but unthreatening. "She wants you to acknowledge her," Ethan explained. "It's how the dogs greet visitors. She's being polite." Eleanor stared down at the tabby cat, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, the tableau held Eleanor frozen in her uncertainty, Luna patient in her friendly overture, Ethan and Duke watching from opposite perspectives. Finally, with a movement so stiff it almost appeared painful, Eleanor extended her hand toward Luna. The cat sniffed it delicately. Then, to everyone's surprise, placed her paw gently on Eleanor's fingers in a gesture remarkably similar to a handshake. "Good heavens," Eleanor whispered, her composure momentarily cracked. "She learned that from Duke," Ethan said softly. "He was trained as a therapy dog before we got him. Rebecca used to take him to the hospice in Lexington once a month." The mention of Rebecca seemed to snap Eleanor back to herself. She withdrew her hand and straightened her already rigid posture. "I'll tell the principal you'll consider the school visit," she said, her voice slightly less certain than before. "Good day, Ethan." As she walked briskly down the path toward her car, Ethan could have sworn he saw her glance back at Luna with an expression that, for just a moment, looked more like confusion than disapproval. "Well," he said to Duke and Luna as they watched Eleanor drive away. "That was interesting." Luna looked up at him and made a soft sound that was neither quite a meow nor a bark. a vocalization unique to her that Ethan had come to interpret as agreement. That evening, as Ethan recorded the encounter in his journal, he found himself wondering about the complexity of fear and how it disguised itself as righteousness or concern for natural order. Eleanor's reaction to Luna's friendly gesture had revealed a crack in her certainty, a moment of genuine connection that had visibly unsettled her. "Rebecca would say that's progress," he told Duke, who lay at his feet while Luna curled on his lap, purring contentedly. "She always believed that understanding begins with a willingness to question our assumptions." He stroked Luna's striped fur thoughtfully. "Maybe that's what Luna's teaching all of us, that the boundaries we create are more flexible than we imagine, if only we're brave enough to test them." The sky darkened ominously over Cedar Hollow as October brought the first major storm of the season. Weather forecasters had been warning about it for days, a massive system moving in from the west, bringing potential flash flooding to areas still saturated from an unusually wet September. Ethan had been preparing his property as best he could, moving valuables to higher shelves and checking that the sump pump in his basement was functioning properly. "Looks like we're in for a rough one," he told his furry companions as they gazed out the living room window at the blackening sky. Duke stood tall and alert while Max and Bella pressed closer to Ethan's legs. Luna, ever the mimic, had adopted Duke's vigilant posture, her gray-striped tail held straight instead of curling upward as most cats would. The first raindrops hit the roof around noon, a gentle patter that quickly intensified into a deafening downpour. By mid-afternoon, the creek that ran along the edge of Ethan's property had swollen to twice its normal size, creeping steadily up the sloping lawn toward his house. When the phone rang sharply, cutting through the sound of rain hammering on the roof, Ethan wasn't surprised to hear Mayor Thompson's voice, tight with concern. "Ethan, we're issuing a mandatory evacuation for your area," he said without preamble. "Carson Creek is overflowing upstream, and the projection models show your neighborhood underwater by nightfall." "Understood," Ethan replied, already mentally calculating what he needed to take. "Is the community center being set up as a shelter again?" "It is," the mayor confirmed. "But Ethan, there's something you should know. Given the number of people being evacuated, the shelter committee has decided that pets will have to be housed separately in the old elementary school gym." Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "All 4 of them." "I'm afraid so. And, the mayor hesitated. "Eleanor Blackburn is on the shelter committee. She's insisting that the cat would be more appropriately housed with other cats, not with the dogs." A spark of anger flared in Ethan's chest. After all these months, after Eleanor had seemed to soften her stance during her visit to his home, she was still trying to separate his unusual family. "That's not going to work for us," Ethan said firmly. "Luna doesn't do well separated from her siblings." "I understand your concern," the mayor said, though his tone suggested he didn't really. "But the committee's decision is final. We need to maintain order during this emergency situation." Ethan glanced at his animals, Duke, standing protectively near Luna, Max and Bella huddled together on their favorite rug. He couldn't imagine forcing them apart during a frightening situation like this. "We'll make other arrangements," he said shortly, and hung up. Within an hour, Ethan had loaded his pickup truck with essential supplies photo albums including Rebecca's, medications, and enough pet food for several days. Getting all 4 animals into the truck cab was a tight squeeze. Luna sat on the center console while the 3 German shepherds crammed into the passenger seat and footwell, a feat only possible due to their excellent training and Luna's small size. The rain was falling in blinding sheets as Ethan navigated the increasingly treacherous roads toward higher ground. Water already covered the lowest parts of Main Street, and emergency vehicles raced past with sirens wailing. The usual 20-minute drive to the community center took nearly an hour in the hazardous conditions. The parking lot was crowded with the vehicles of other evacuees. When Ethan finally arrived, Volunteers in bright yellow raincoats directed traffic and helped people unload their belongings. Ethan spotted Eleanor almost immediately. She was stationed at the entrance, clipboard in hand, directing families with practiced efficiency. Taking a deep breath, Ethan leashed all 4 animals and approached the shelter entrance, rain plastering his gray hair to his scalp despite the hat he wore. The German shepherds moved in perfect formation beside him, with Luna trotting along in their midst, her leash hardly necessary given how closely she mimicked their disciplined walking style. Eleanor's eyes narrowed when she saw him approaching with all 4 animals. "Ethan," she said, voice clipped. "The pet shelter is at the elementary school, 2 blocks east." "I understand that," Ethan replied calmly. "But we're staying together. All of us." "That's not possible," Eleanor insisted. "The committee decided." "I don't give a damn what the committee decided," Ethan interrupted, his patience worn thin by concern for his home and the stress of evacuation. "These animals are a family unit. Separating them during a crisis would be cruel and unnecessary." Other evacuees had begun to watch the confrontation with interest. Ethan noticed Lily standing nearby, her eyes wide with concern as she clutched a stuffed animal to her chest. "Rules are rules, Ethan," Eleanor said, though he detected a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "The dogs go to the canine section, the cat to the feline section. That's how we maintain order." "Your order doesn't account for exceptions," Ethan argued. "Luna has never been separated from her family." "She'd be terrified." "She's a cat, Ethan," Eleanor said with exaggerated patience. "She belongs with other cats. She doesn't know that." Lily piped up suddenly, stepping forward despite her grandmother's disapproving glare. "Luna thinks she's a dog. She'd be scared with other cats." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line as she looked from her granddaughter to Ethan and his unusual family. Around them, the storm intensified, wind driving the rain sideways and rattling the community center's windows. "This isn't up for debate," she finally said. "I'm sorry, Ethan, but we can't make exceptions." Ethan straightened to his full height, rainwater dripping from his hat brim. "Then we'll find shelter elsewhere. I won't separate them." "In this weather, don't be foolish," Eleanor scolded. "Where would you even go?" "We'll sleep in my truck if we have to," Ethan said firmly. "It's parked on high ground." "Grandma, please," Lily pleaded, tugging at Eleanor's raincoat. "Luna needs to stay with Duke and the others. She gets scared without them." Eleanor looked from her granddaughter's imploring face to Ethan's resolute one, then down at the 4 animals, standing patiently in the rain. Luna had pressed herself against Duke's leg, a gesture so canine in its seeking of reassurance that even Eleanor couldn't miss its significance. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she muttered. "Fine. You can keep them together in the storage room at the back. It's small, but it's private. Just keep that cat from disturbing the other evacuees." Relief flooded through Ethan. "Thank you, Eleanor. I appreciate it." She waved away his gratitude. "Don't make me regret this. Ethan Calloway." The storage room was indeed small, but it was dry and quiet, with enough space for Ethan to arrange blankets into comfortable bedding for himself and his animals. As the storm raged outside, they settled in for what promised to be a long night. Luna curled up between Duke and Bella, while Max kept watch by the door. Ethan had just begun to doze when a commotion outside the room jolted him awake. Raised voices and hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. Duke was immediately alert, ears pricked forward, with Luna mirroring his posture perfectly beside him. The door flew open, revealing a rain-drenched volunteer whose name badge identified him as Tom. "We need help," he said breathlessly. "A family hasn't shown up at any of the shelters, and they've got a little girl the Millers from Creek Road." Ethan was on his feet in an instant. The Millers. Their place is right on the creek bend. They should have evacuated hours ago. Search and rescue is overwhelmed with calls. Tom explained. They can't get there for at least 2 more hours, and the water's still rising. Where exactly on Creek Road? Ethan asked, already reaching for his coat. About a mile past your place, Tom said. The old Carter property. Creek Road followed Carson Creek for several miles before branching off toward the mountains. If the Millers lived at the old Carter place, they were in one of the most flood-prone areas of Cedar Hollow. I know that area well, Ethan said grimly. I'm going to help look for them. In this weather, that's suicide, Tom protested. The creek's already breached its banks in multiple places. All the more reason to find them quickly, Ethan replied, pulling on his boots. Without consciously deciding, he reached for the animals' leashes. Duke, Max, and Bella had all been trained in basic search techniques years ago. Rebecca had volunteered with the local wilderness rescue team and had insisted on training their dogs. They weren't certified rescue dogs, but they were intelligent and responsive to commands. And Luna well. Luna would go wherever her family went. You're taking your pets, Tom asked incredulously, into a flood zone. These aren't just pets, Ethan said, clipping on the leashes. They're the best search team we've got right now. The rain had temporarily lessened when Ethan and his animals emerged from the community center, though the wind still howled ominously between buildings. To his surprise, Eleanor stood under the shelter of the entrance overhang, her face pale with worry as Tom explained the situation. The Miller's little girl Sophia, she's in Lily's class, Eleanor said, her usual composure shaken. They were supposed to come straight here after picking up some medication from their house. We'll find them, Ethan promised, though he knew better than to make guarantees in weather like this. I'm coming with you, Eleanor declared, reaching for her raincoat. Absolutely not, Ethan said firmly. The best thing you can do for Lily is stay here with her. I've got Duke, Max, and Bella. They're good trackers. And Luna? Eleanor asked, eyeing the cat who stood alertly beside the German shepherds, seemingly unbothered by the rain soaking her gray-striped fur. Ethan hadn't actually planned to take Luna into the dangerous conditions, but she had moved to stand by Duke with such determination that he hesitated to separate her from the others. Luna goes where her family goes, he said simply. To his surprise, Eleanor nodded. Be careful, Ethan. All of you. Her usual disapproval was nowhere in evidence, replaced by genuine concern. As Ethan and his unusual search party headed toward his truck, he heard Eleanor's voice behind him. Ethan, wait. She hurried forward, holding out a small battery-powered emergency radio. Take this. It's tuned to the emergency frequency. They're updating evacuation zones every 15 minutes. Their eyes met for a moment, concern passing between two people who had rarely agreed on anything yet found themselves united by crisis. Thank you, Ethan said, tucking the radio into his pocket. Just bring them back safe, Eleanor replied, and Ethan understood she wasn't only talking about the missing family. The drive toward Creek Road was even more hazardous than earlier. Twice Ethan had to detour around flooded sections of road, and once he nearly lost control on a curve where mud had washed across the pavement. As they neared the Miller property, the true scope of the disaster became apparent. What had once been pasture land was now a vast brown lake, dotted with the tops of fences and occasional roof peaks where outbuildings had been swallowed by the rising water. This is as far as we drive, Ethan told his companions, pulling the truck onto a slight rise that offered some protection from the rising water. From here, we go on foot. The Miller house was barely visible through the curtain of rain, a 2-story structure set back from the road atop a small hill. In normal conditions, The creek would be a good 100 yards from their front door. But tonight, angry brown water had already swallowed half that distance. "Find," Ethan commanded the dogs, a search instruction they remembered from their training with Rebecca. "Find people." The aftermath of the flood revealed its cruel arithmetic in stark terms. 17 homes destroyed completely, 38 with severe damage, nearly 60 families displaced, including Ethan Calloway. 2 weeks after the dramatic rescue of the Miller family, an event that had already taken on the burnished glow of local legend, Ethan stood in the empty living room of his flood-damaged home, staring at the eviction notice in his hand. The storms had receded, leaving behind a swath of destruction across Cedar Hollow. Ethan's house, while still standing, had suffered significant water damage to its foundation, damage his landlord had deemed too expensive to repair. "Property's not worth salvaging," the man had said bluntly over the phone. "Insurance is paying me out. I'm selling the land to developers once it dries out enough for bulldozers. I've lived here 15 years. Ethan had protested. "Rebecca and I renovated the entire first floor ourselves." "Sorry, Ethan. Business is business. You've got 30 days to find new accommodations. 30 days to find a place that would accept a 65-year-old man on a fixed income, along with 3 German shepherds and a cat who thought she was a dog." It seemed an impossible task in a town the size of Cedar Hollow, where rental properties were scarce even in the best of times, let alone after a natural disaster. "What do you think, gang?" Ethan asked his animals as they gathered around him, sensing his distress. Duke pressed his large head against Ethan's palm while Bella leaned against his leg. Max paced anxiously. And Luna dear. Peculiar Luna sat at attention like the dogs, her gray striped tail swishing with concern. Ethan had been investigating options for 2 days straight. The few available rentals in Cedar Hollow all had strict pet policies, 1 pet maximum, or small pets only, or no pets at all. The nearest apartment complex that might accommodate his needs was in Lexington, 20 miles away, and even they balked at the idea of 3 large dogs. "It's not looking good," he admitted aloud. "We might have to split up." The very thought made his chest tighten painfully. After all they'd been through together, after the way these animals had helped him survive the darkest period of his life, the idea of separating them felt like a betrayal. But what choice did he have? The rescue of the Miller family had temporarily elevated Ethan and his unusual menagerie to local hero status. 8-year-old Sophia Miller had been trapped in an upstairs bedroom with rising water threatening the second floor when Ethan's search party arrived. With the main staircase already submerged and the parents stranded on the roof after attempting to signal for help, it had been Luna who discovered the bedroom window that could be accessed via a partially collapsed trellis. The small cat had nimbly navigated the precarious structure, meowing loudly until Ethan understood what she'd found. With Luna guiding them, Ethan and the dogs had managed to help the terrified family to safety, minutes before the foundation of the house gave way in the raging flood. The Cedar Hollow Gazette had run a front-page story, "Man's Unusual Family Saves Girl from Flood." The article had quoted Sophia saying the brave cat dog had made her feel safe during the rescue. For a brief, shining moment, Luna's unusual upbringing had been celebrated rather than questioned. But public memory was short, and practical concerns soon overshadowed heroic deeds. Later that afternoon, Dr. Hayes stopped by to check on them all. The veterinarian had been making rounds to all his clients affected by the flood, offering free wellness checks and medication refills for those cut off from his clinic. "How are they doing?" he asked, kneeling to examine each animal in turn. Duke, in particular, worried him. The old dog had been limping badly since the rescue, the strain of the night's exertions telling on his arthritic joints. "Physically, they're fine," Ethan replied. "But we've got a problem." He explained the eviction situation as Dr. Hayes examined Luna, checking her eyes, ears, and coat for any flood-related issues. The tabby submitted to the examination with the same calm cooperation as her canine siblings had shown. "That's a tough break." "Doctor," Hayes said sympathetically when Ethan finished, "have you considered temporarily fostering them out while you find a place that can take all of you?" Ethan ran a hand over his face. "That's probably what it's going to come down to. I just hate the thought of separating them, especially Luna. She's never been apart from the dogs." Dr. Hayes nodded thoughtfully, watching as Luna returned to her customary position between Bella and Duke. "I could take Duke," he offered. "My apartment allows one large dog. He's going to need daily pain management for his leg anyway, after that rescue effort." Ethan appreciated the offer, but the thought of separating the aging Duke from his companions in what might be his final years felt especially painful. Duke had been Rebecca's first dog, her special companion. Seeing the struggle on Ethan's face, Dr. Hayes placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It's just a temporary solution," he reminded him, "until you find something that works for all of you." Despite his reluctance, Ethan knew he had to consider all options. With few choices and time running short, he found himself on Eleanor Blackburn's doorstep the following day, Luna's carrier in one hand and a bag of her supplies in the other. The 3 German shepherds had been left at home. Ethan feared their reaction if they realized Luna was being taken away. He dreaded the moment when they would discover her absence, imagining their confusion as they searched the house for their small companion. "It's just for a little while," he assured the agitated tabby as Eleanor opened her door, "just until I find us a new place that will take everyone." Eleanor's house was immaculate, all floral patterns and doilies. Exactly what one would expect from a woman of her generation and temperament. "I've prepared a space for her," she said, leading Ethan to a small room off the kitchen. A cat bed, litter box, scratching post, and toys had been arranged with perfect precision. "She's not used to being alone," Ethan warned as he set down the carrier. "She might be very upset at first." Eleanor had changed since the flood. Her experience witnessing Luna's crucial role in the Miller rescue, along with Ethan's insistence on keeping his unusual family together at the shelter, had softened something in her rigid world view. While she wasn't exactly warm, there was a new thoughtfulness in her manner. "Emily and I have been reading about cat behavior," she replied with unexpected gentleness. "We understand this will be an adjustment." Ethan knelt and opened the carrier door. Luna emerged cautiously, her usual confidence absent in these unfamiliar surroundings. She looked up at Ethan with an expression that nearly broke his heart. "It's just for a little while, girl," he repeated, scratching behind her ears. "Be good for Eleanor and Lily." As he stood to leave, Luna tried to follow him, making a small chirping sound she used when she wanted to go for a walk with the dogs. Ethan had to steel himself to close the door on her confused face. "I'll visit every day," he promised Eleanor. "And if it's not working out, we'll manage," she assured him. "Lily is quite determined to make this work." The rest of the day passed in a blur of phone calls and apartment applications. By evening, Ethan had secured temporary accommodations for Max with the Millers, who felt they owed him at least that much after the rescue. Bella would go to Tom from the community center, who had a fenced yard and a fondness for German shepherds. Dr. Hayes had already collected Duke that morning. His house felt cavernous without them, empty in a way it hadn't been since Rebecca died. Ethan wandered from room to room, the silence pressing in on him from all sides. Even the task of packing his belongings couldn't distract him from the ache of separation. The phone rang shortly after 9. It was Eleanor, her voice tense. "Ethan, we have a situation. Luna won't eat. She's just sitting by the door making the strangest sounds." Ethan's heart sank. She's looking for her family, for the dogs. I was afraid this might happen. Lily's quite upset. She's tried everything. Treats, toys, even that ridiculous dog command you use at mealtimes. Despite his concern, Ethan had to smile at the image of Eleanor Blackburn trying to get a cat to respond to, "Okay, eat up." "I'll come first thing in the morning," he promised. "Maybe seeing me will help settle her." But morning brought even worse news. Eleanor called at dawn, her voice frantic. "Ethan, Duke is here on my front porch. He's scratching at the door and whining. I don't know how he got loose or found his way here, but he's absolutely determined to get inside." Ethan was already pulling on his boots. "I'll be right there. Don't let him in yet. He might be too excited and scare Luna." "That's just it," Eleanor said, her voice odd. "Luna heard him. She's at the window now, making those strange barking sounds." "I've never seen anything like it." By the time Ethan arrived at Eleanor's house, a small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk. Duke sat on the front porch, his posture alert but calm, his eyes fixed on the living room window where Luna could be seen pacing back and forth, occasionally pressing a paw against the glass. "He showed up about an hour ago," Dr. Hayes explained, looking sheepish. "Somehow got through a locked door at my apartment. I've been trying to catch him, but he came straight here and won't budge." "How did he even know where to find her?" Eleanor asked, standing in her doorway. "Dogs have an incredible sense of smell." Dr. Hayes replied, "He must have picked up Luna's scent on Ethan when he visited me yesterday." Ethan approached Duke, who acknowledged him with a quick glance but kept his primary focus on the window. "You came for her, didn't you, boy?" Ethan said softly, kneeling beside the large German shepherd. "You couldn't stand being separated either." Duke whined softly, a sound of such profound distress that Ethan felt his own eyes welling up. Inside the house, Luna continued her frantic pacing. "I think we should let them see each other," Ethan suggested, "just to calm them both down." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "Very well, but just for a moment. I don't want chaos in my living room." The moment the front door opened wide enough, Duke slipped through with surprising gentleness for such a large dog. He moved directly to where Luna waited, her small body quivering with anticipation. There was no barking, no excess of energy, just Duke lowering his head to touch noses with Luna, who immediately pressed her entire body against his front leg. The room fell silent as everyone watched the reunion. Even Eleanor seemed moved by the obvious relief both animals displayed at being together again. "Well," she said finally, her voice unusually soft, "I suppose that settles that." "Settles what?" Ethan asked, still watching the pair, Luna now purring audibly as she rubbed against Duke's chest, the big dog gently nuzzling her striped fur. Eleanor straightened her shoulders. "They can't be separated. Anyone with eyes can see that. It would be cruel." The remarkable reunion between Duke and Luna catalyzed a change in Eleanor Blackburn that no one in Cedar Hollow could have predicted. Standing in her immaculate living room, watching the German shepherd gently nuzzle the gray tabby cat, who responded with decidedly uncat-like affection, something shifted in the older woman's rigid world-view. "I've been wrong about this," she admitted quietly to Ethan, her eyes never leaving the animals. "What these two have, what all of them have together, it's something special." Ethan nodded, too moved by the scene to speak. Duke had positioned himself on Eleanor's pristine floral rug, lying down with dignified calm, while Luna curled against his side, purring loudly enough for everyone to hear. The tabby occasionally reached out a paw to touch Duke's muzzle, as if reassuring herself that he was really there. "I knew cats and dogs could tolerate each other," Eleanor continued, "but I've never seen anything like this. It's almost as if they're speaking a language only they understand." "Family," Ethan said simply. Their family. Lily arrived from school to find her grandmother's living room transformed into an impromptu animal sanctuary. Her face lit up at the sight of Duke and Luna together again, and she immediately dropped to her knees beside them, notebook in hand. "This is amazing data," she declared with the earnestness only a 10-year-old scientist could muster. Luna's stress behaviors completely disappeared as soon as Duke arrived. Her tail position changed from agitated to content, and her vocalization shifted from distress calls to communication sounds. "Communication sounds?" Dr. Hayes asked, curious despite himself. Lily nodded vigorously. "Luna doesn't meow like a regular cat. She makes these special sounds when she's talking to the dogs. Kind of between a meow and a bark. I've been recording them." While this unexpected reunion was unfolding at Eleanor's house, a more somber realization was settling over Ethan. Duke's dramatic escape and journey to find Luna had taken a toll on the aging dog. His breathing was labored, and his back leg, injured during the flood rescue, seemed to be causing him significant pain despite Dr. Hayes's treatments. "He needs rest," the veterinarian said quietly to Ethan. "That journey was hard on him, at his age, with his arthritis and the strain from the rescue." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Ethan knew what wasn't being said, that Duke's devotion to Luna might have accelerated his decline, that the old dog had pushed his aging body beyond its limits out of love for his feline sister. Later that evening, after the crowd had dispersed and Duke had been made comfortable on a bed Eleanor had reluctantly allowed in her living room, she approached Ethan with uncharacteristic hesitation. "There's something I need to show you," she said, leading him to her small home office. From a drawer in her desk, she withdrew a faded newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. "This is why I've been so concerned about your cat." The clipping, dated 30 years earlier, showed a hospital room with a young boy, his face bandaged extensively. The headline read, "Local boy attacked by stray cat. Infection threatens eyesight." "That's Thomas, my son," Eleanor said quietly. "He was 8 when it happened. He tried to pet a feral cat despite my warnings. The cat slashed his face badly. The wounds became infected, and for a while the doctors thought he might lose vision in his right eye." Ethan studied the photo, understanding blooming. "Eleanor, I had no idea." She took the clipping back, folding it carefully along well-worn creases. "No one does. Thomas recovered. Thank the Lord. Though he still has the scars. He lives in Cincinnati now. Rarely visits. But I never forgot how quickly that cat turned on him. How vicious it was despite seeming calm moments before." She looked toward the living room, where Duke and Luna were resting peacefully. "I've always believed cats are unpredictable. Dangerous even. The idea of one being raised to think it's something else." She shook her head. "I was terrified. Ethan, what if Luna's true nature emerged suddenly around children like Lily? What if she hurt someone?" The admission cast Eleanor's opposition in an entirely new light. What Ethan had interpreted as rigid traditionalism had actually been fear, a grandmother's deep-seated worry about history repeating itself. "Luna would never harm Lily," Ethan said gently. "She wasn't raised by feral cats. Eleanor, she was raised by 3 well-trained dogs who've taught her gentleness and restraint." "I'm beginning to see that," Eleanor admitted. "The way she stayed so calm when Duke arrived, how careful she is with her claws around him despite her excitement. It's not what I expected." Their conversation was interrupted by Lily, who burst into the room clutching a shoebox filled with papers. "Grandma, Mr. Calloway, I found something important in the attic when I was looking for blankets for Duke." Where inside the box were old letters and photographs that Eleanor had clearly not seen in years. Among them was a letter from Rebecca to Eleanor, dated shortly after the Calloways had moved to Cedar Hollow. "I found this while unpacking," Lily explained, holding out the envelope. "It has your name on it, but it was never mailed." Eleanor took the letter with trembling hands. It was addressed in Rebecca's flowing handwriting. The envelope yellowed with age but never sealed. With Ethan's nod of permission, she carefully extracted the single sheet of paper inside. "Dear Eleanor," she read aloud, her voice catching. "I wanted to thank you for your warm welcome to Cedar Hollow and for the beautiful plant you brought to our housewarming. I hope we can become friends despite our different approaches to life. Before moving here, I studied animal behavior at university, focusing on how early environment shapes development across species lines. I've always believed that the boundaries we create between different types of animals and people are more fluid than we acknowledge. Perhaps someday I'll have the chance to show you how creatures we think of as natural enemies can form deep bonds when given the opportunity to know each other without preconceptions. With appreciation, Rebecca Calloway." Eleanor lowered the letter, her eyes moist. "She tried to reach out to me, but I was already so set in my ways. I remember being quite cool to her when you first arrived, thinking her too progressive, too questioning of traditional values." "Rebecca had that effect on people," Ethan said softly. "She saw beyond categories, always looking for connections others missed." "Like Luna," Lily added, stroking the cat's head as she wandered into the room, followed closely by Duke. "She doesn't know she's supposed to be afraid of dogs because nobody ever told her." The wisdom in the child's observation hung in the air, making the three adults fall silent. Luna sat at Duke's feet, looking up at them all with calm green eyes that seemed to contain their own kind of wisdom. The discovery of Rebecca's unsent letter spread ripples through the following days. Eleanor, seemingly transformed by this connection to a woman she had misjudged, became determined to help solve Ethan's housing crisis. "I know most of the property owners in Cedar Hollow," she announced one morning over coffee, her silver hair pulled into its usual tight bun, but her expression softer than Ethan had ever seen it. "Many of them owe me favors for various community services I've provided over the years. Let me make some calls." Ethan was speechless. After months of Eleanor campaigning against his unnatural pet arrangements, her offer of help seemed nothing short of miraculous. Lily beamed at her grandmother. "See, I told you Luna was special." "Yes, well," Eleanor sniffed, though her eyes were soft as she glanced at the animals. "I recognize determination when I see it. That cat has made her choice, and who am I to argue with such conviction?" Word of Duke's daring escape and journey to find Luna spread through Cedar Hollow like wildfire, growing more elaborate with each retelling. By the weekend, local versions of the story had Duke navigating miles of treacherous terrain, guided only by love for his feline sister. Ethan's journal about Luna, shared among hospital staff and then beyond, took on a life of its own. A reporter from the Lexington Herald did an interview, complete with photographs of all 4 animals that Lily had taken for her observation project. The headline read, "Man's Unusual Family Faces Homelessness After Flood Cat, Raised by German Shepherds Refuses Separation." Letters and emails began arriving from all over the state. People touched by the story offered encouragement and, in some cases, practical help. A pet food company sent a month's supply of premium food for all 4 animals. A local carpenter volunteered to build custom shelving in whatever new home Ethan found to create proper cat perches that would accommodate Luna's dual nature. Ethan Calloway stood on the front porch of a modest white farmhouse at the edge of Cedar Hollow, breathing in the crisp autumn air. 6 months had passed since the flood that had nearly separated his unusual family. Now, as golden leaves drifted down from the maples lining the long gravel driveway, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for the strange and winding path that had brought them all here. "Another beautiful day," he remarked to Duke, who sat attentively beside him. The German Shepherd's muzzle had grown significantly grayer over the past year, and his movements had become slower, more deliberate, but his eyes remained alert and watchful. From inside the house came the sound of Lily's laughter, followed by the distinctive half-meow, half-bark that everyone in Cedar Hollow now recognized as Luna's unique vocalization. The story of how they had secured this perfect home still amazed Ethan when he thought about it. After the Lexington Herald article, a retired couple from the neighboring county had reached out. They were moving to Arizona for health reasons and had been struggling to find the right caretakers for their beloved farmhouse, 5 acres with a sturdy fence, a renovated barn, and enough space for a man and his 4-legged family to live comfortably. "We've had dogs and cats all our lives," Mrs. Henderson had explained during their first meeting. "When we read about your situation, it just felt right. This place needs life in it, needs a family that appreciates it." The terms had been more than generous, a long-term lease with rent well below market value in exchange for Ethan maintaining the property and allowing the Hendersons to visit occasionally when they returned to see relatives. It was an arrangement that seemed almost too perfect to be true. Rebecca would have loved this place, Ethan often thought to himself. Sometimes in the quiet mornings, when mist rose from the small pond behind the house, he could almost feel her presence, could almost hear her telling him that everything had worked out exactly as it should. Inside, the farmhouse had transformed into a home that accommodated both human and animal needs. Ethan's woodworking skills, rusty from disuse after Rebecca's death, had reawakened as he built ramps, perches, and climbing structures that allowed Luna to express both her feline agility and her canine desire to be part of the pack. The large, open living room gave the German Shepherds plenty of space to stretch out, with Luna typically claiming her spot in the middle of the canine pile. Lily Blackburn had become a regular weekend visitor, continuing her observations of Luna for what had evolved from a curious child's project into a serious scientific study. Dr. Hayes had connected her with a professor from the state university who specialized in animal behavior, and the young girl was now receiving mentorship that might well shape her future career. "Luna used a new vocalization today," she announced excitedly, bounding onto the porch with her ever-present notebook. "It's like she's developing her own language, part cat, part dog, but uniquely Luna." "Is that so?" Ethan smiled at her enthusiasm. "And what was she trying to say?" "I think she was telling Bella to wait her turn for treats," Lily replied. "She made this sound somewhere between a warning growl and a cat's chirp, and Bella immediately backed up and let Luna go first." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "They've always had their own way of communicating. Rebecca used to say animals understand more than we give them credit for." From the most unlikely corners had come additional support for Ethan's unusual family. Eleanor Blackburn, once their most vocal critic, had become their most steadfast defender. After witnessing Duke and Luna's profound bond firsthand, she had undergone what she called a reconsideration of natural order, and now spoke forcefully against anyone who questioned the arrangement. "Nature is full of exceptions," she had declared at the most recent town council meeting when the subject of pet regulations arose. "Who are we to say what is normal for an animal when we can plainly see they're thriving?" Her transformation had extended beyond words to actions. Twice weekly, Eleanor now brought her women's church group to Ethan's farm, where they knitted and chatted while watching what they called the Luna Show, the gray tabby's earnest attempts to participate in whatever the German Shepherds were doing, from fetch games to obedience training. Most remarkably, Eleanor had begun fostering rescue cats, socializing them for adoption with the help of Duke, whose gentle patience seemed to calm even the most traumatized felines. Luna served as an unusual ambassador between species, demonstrating to frightened cats that dogs need not be feared, though none of the foster cats ever attempted to imitate her dog-like behaviors. "Some things can't be taught," Dr. Hayes had observed during one of his regular visits to check on the animals. Luna's adaptation happened during a critical developmental window. She's one of a kind. One of a kind indeed, Ethan thought as he watched Luna emerge onto the porch, flanked by Max and Bella. The tabby had grown into a magnificent cat, with unusually strong muscles from keeping up with her larger siblings. Her gray-striped coat gleamed with health, and her movements flowed with a grace that somehow combined feline precision with canine purpose. Luna surveyed her domain from the porch steps, then did something that still made Ethan smile no matter how many times he witnessed it. She sat precisely like the German shepherds, her smaller body mimicking their posture perfectly, patiently waiting for their daily walk to begin. The Cedar Hollow Animal Shelter had recently asked Ethan to bring Luna and the dogs in once a month to help socialize difficult-to-place animals. Luna, in particular, had shown a remarkable ability to calm anxious dogs and reassure skeptical cats, as though she spoke both languages and could translate between worlds. "We ready for our walk?" Ethan asked, reaching for the leashes that hung by the front door. All four animals immediately assumed their positions in their practiced routine, Duke at the lead, Max and Bella flanking him, and Luna taking her place in the formation with the dignity of a soldier joining her platoon. As they set off down the long driveway, a car pulled up, and Eleanor emerged with a fresh apple pie and a newspaper tucked under her arm. "Have you seen the latest?" she called, waving the paper. "Your Luna's become something of a celebrity." The article she showed him featured a photo of Luna at the animal shelter, sitting attentively beside a traumatized rescue dog that had previously refused to interact with humans or other animals. The headline read, "Therapy cat who thinks she's a dog helps heal broken hearts at local shelter." Ethan smiled as he read the piece, which described how Luna's unique perspective as an animal comfortable in both worlds made her exceptionally effective at bridging gaps between frightened animals and potential adopters. "She's teaching us all something, isn't she?" Eleanor remarked, watching as Luna trotted confidently alongside the German shepherds. "About finding your own way in the world, even when it doesn't match what others expect of you." "I think Rebecca knew that all along," Ethan replied softly. "It's why she wanted to add a cat to our family in the first place. She always said different perspectives make us stronger." The most difficult moment of the past 6 months had come 3 weeks after they moved into the farmhouse. Duke, the patriarch of their unusual family, had finally succumbed to the effects of age and the strain of his heroic efforts during the flood. His passing had been peaceful at home, on his favorite rug before the fireplace, surrounded by those who loved him. Luna's grief had been as profound as any Ethan had ever witnessed in an animal. For days, she had searched the house, looking in all Duke's favorite spots, making small, confused sounds when she couldn't find him. At night, she had taken to sleeping on his old blanket, curled into a tight ball as if trying to preserve his scent. Gradually, with the support of Max and Bella, she had adjusted to the new reality of their family, and in a development that had brought tears to Ethan's eyes. Luna had begun to adopt some of Duke's protective behaviors, checking the doors at night, watching over the younger dogs while they slept, maintaining the calm vigilance that had been Duke's special contribution to their household. "She's carrying on his legacy," Lily had observed with the simple wisdom of childhood, "like she's keeping a part of him alive by being a little bit more like him." The afternoon sun gilded the autumn landscape as Ethan walked with his remarkable family along paths that had become familiar and dear. Luna occasionally raced ahead with bursts of feline speed, then circled back to resume her position in the canine formation, never fully leaving either world behind, but creating something new and wonderful in the space between them. Her journey from half-drowned kitten to confident, unique individual who had touched so many lives reminded Ethan daily that family came in all forms. The boundaries between species, like the rigid categories humans so often clung to, were perhaps more fluid than anyone had imagined. And in that fluidity, in that willingness to adapt and connect, lay a kind of wisdom worth honoring. Good girl. Luna, Ethan murmured as she looked up at him with clear, intelligent eyes that seemed to understand every word. As they rounded the bend in the path that led back to the farmhouse, Ethan could see Eleanor and Lily waiting on the porch. Beside them stood Dr. Hayes, holding what appeared to be a framed certificate. "Special delivery," the veterinarian called as they approached. "Luna's officially the first cat ever certified in our county's animal therapy program. The review board made an exception after seeing her work with those shelter animals." Eleanor beamed with pride, as if Luna were her own. "Exceptions," she said, nodding firmly. "That's what life is all about, isn't it? Recognizing when the rules need to bend to accommodate something extraordinary." From inside the house, the soft notes of a piano recording drifted through the open windows, one of Rebecca's favorite pieces that Ethan had recently begun playing again. The melody seemed to float across the autumn air, connecting past to present, loss to renewal. In the same way Luna had bridged the gap between cat and dog, creating something unique and beautiful in the process. "You found your way home," Ethan told his unusual family as they gathered on the porch steps, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, just like the rest of us. In the quiet corners of our hearts, we all know what it means to feel displaced, to wonder where we belong in a world that seems to have rigid expectations for who we should be. Luna's story speaks to something profound in the human experience, especially as we enter life's autumn years. Like this remarkable cat who found her identity between worlds. Many of us have discovered that our true selves don't always fit neatly into society's boxes. We understand what it means to lose a beloved partner, as Ethan lost Rebecca, and to find healing in unexpected places. We know the pain of having to leave homes filled with memories and the uncertainty of building something new. But Luna's journey reminds us that family isn't defined by convention. It's created through love, loyalty, and the courage to be authentically ourselves. In our golden years, as we face transitions and losses, perhaps our greatest wisdom is recognizing that adaptation isn't surrender, but strength. The bonds we forge across differences, across generations, across perspectives, across the artificial boundaries we create, these connections sustain us through life's storms. Like Luna, we can embrace who we truly are, even when it defies expectation, and in doing so, find our way home to ourselves. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.